Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, education lovers. Welcome to the program. I'm Ryan Kairalla, and it is so great to have you here on this week's installment of Big Ideas in Education. Joining us on the program this week is Dr. Maria Armstrong, the Executive Director of the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. Recently, the ALAS held its 100 Superintendent March on Capitol Hill, where administrators from around the country discussed education policy priorities with D.C. legislators. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting alasedu.org. Let's go ahead and bring out Dr. Armstrong. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is very much my pleasure. This is going to be a hoot. Obviously, we are quite aware and grateful for the amazing work that superintendents do at the system level to make all of the education stakeholders in the best position to succeed and create great outcomes for students. And I know that the ALAS is pivotal in creating some great policy outcomes to help make those goals happen. Give us a 30,000-foot view of the ALAS, if you could. What should people know about this organization? What does it do? What does your membership look like? What kind of support do you provide?
The 30,000-foot. Wow, I used to say that as a superintendent. That's the 30,000-foot level. I look at ALAS or ALAS as more of a 50,000-foot. And the reason I say that is because our membership is expanding and is very expansive because it's across the U.S., including the territory of Puerto Rico. And so as we grow our state affiliates, so does grow our membership. And what we're about across, the nation is really uplifting the notion that if you sit at our table, not only will you learn from each other, but you will also be able to share what works and what doesn't work in the Latino community, because the Latino community is so diverse in and of itself that the perspectives that we bring from our backgrounds and from our geographic locations is one where we're able to provide that look into what works best for kids in our schools. And as you know, our Latino students are the majority of students in the public education system. And so what we bring to our members is not only the opportunity to participate from within their states, but because we offer different kinds of programs and services, I think that that's probably, in a nutshell, the 50,000-foot level view of it.
And what are some of the initiatives that you prioritize most in your particular work as the executive director?
Yeah, so the board that I represent is a board of 15, and the predominance of them are sitting superintendents. So that's their day gig, So we, what they do is strictly on a voluntary basis. And so the work that they direct me and afford me the flexibility to do is provide the priorities that they have set. We do an annual board retreat where priorities are revisited, perhaps modified, or continue because there are issues that are longstanding. But those priorities often include one of the things that we always talk about and is a mainstay is increasing our teacher and leadership pipeline. And so being able to do that, we always keep that as a priority at the forefront. The other is being able to be a viable and active voice here on the Hill. So being able to be that advocate for the Latino perspective for all students, of course, because we serve all students, but there is that niche of being able to share the experiences that we bring to the table. And then, of course, another priority is always looking at how do we continue to provide and leverage our multilingual view of being able to ensure that we are looking at our goals of language more of an asset, of course, and not as a deficit. And so those are kind of the three mainstays when it comes to priorities.
Well, let's turn back to what you were talking about there, I think, in your second priority about legislative advocacy, because obviously that's a pretty big aspect of what ALAS does. And I understand that recently your organization hosted a 100 superintendent march on the Hill. I mean, that must be just the imagery of a bunch of powerful superintendents marching down Capitol Hill. Whatever it is, I want to give them everything they want. Tell us about what this event was like and why it was so important for your members.
Sure. So this was our second annual. We had it in March. The pun, I love a good pun. So it's a collaborative event. The last year we held it with the National Alliance of Black School Educators, otherwise known as NABSE. And so we invited our superintendents from both organizations. And it was our first attempt last year, so inaugural event, and it was very well received. So to have them ascend to DC, was a day and a half where we brought in folks from the Department of Education to be able to speak to them directly about the things that were going on. We had some committees that I typically sit on to come and bring their perspective of what they're doing and how we, as our different organizations, collaborate with other organizations throughout DC. And also, we, met. The march was, we chartered a bus from, moving us from our location to the bottom of the hill, and then we walked up to the office there on to be able to visit all the different offices of our representatives. And so it's a short march, but it's still a little bit uphill. And
it would have been brutal to have you march all the way from your headquarters. Don't worry, no one would have expected that of you.
And so we spent a full day in doing that. This year was super special for us because when we did gather, we had our speakers and then we had our own members share some of the work that they're doing in their respective districts. But this year we were able to tour and actually step foot on the speaker's balcony, which, as you know, is a coveted piece of property there. And so to be able to do that and grab a group picture of the best view from the mall was pretty amazing. And then have some behind the scenes, tour of the offices there, outside of speaking with our representatives about what the priorities, teacher shortage is obviously on everyone's mind, but there's also some of the advocacy work that we are looking at, being able to bring solutions, not just, a handout saying we need more, but we actually have some solutions to some of these issues.
Well, when you're interacting with legislators, I imagine a big part of what you have to do is educating them about a policy area about which they may not be as much of an expert as you are. And thankfully, you all are trained educators, so you're going to be pretty good at that part of the advocacy. Is there a particular misconception or at least a point of ignorance that a lot of legislators have when you talk to them about education that you often have to help them with when you're engaged in these one-on-one conversations?
I think because there's also the preconceived notion of we always hear the same thing over and over from educators versus, these are some top issues. These are the issues of the day. These are the things that are changing the landscape of education, whether we inflict it upon us or it's being inflicted, on us. And so we want to make sure that when we are educating them, that they're getting a grand scope, because things are very different in our rural communities per se versus our, large urban. And so we want to make sure that they are getting the holistic perspective of all of our members. And I think that's the piece of education. It's not, it's not this broad brush anymore about a school looks like this or a community looks like that. We really have to share with them not only, the data points, but the narrative, the stories that are behind those numbers and experiences, so to really make it come to life and hit home about it. All of it matters, because at the end of the day, I don't know about you, but I can't think of any one of them or us who didn't walk the classroom and go through the system ourselves. But oftentimes we rely on that piece of information versus what is actually happening in the classroom today. It's a very different, time. It's a very different time.
Yep. Earlier in one of your prior answers, you brought up teacher shortages. And so since I have an expert here who I imagine is dealing with teacher shortages and who her members are dealing with teacher shortages on a daily basis, love to get your perspective on this issue. Is there anything that Ulysse is advocating for, or any initiatives that you all are doing to try to help address this issue, either at the school level or just at the general policy level?
Yes, on a couple of fronts. Our members are the best and the brightest and, obviously most educated. And so some of the ideas I'll share with you are, one, we have states that have different regs or regulations and credentialing, parts that we don't take into consideration how we're a very mobile society. And so moving from one state to the other, there are issues with that, because you have to then either sign up for more classes, sign up for a different licensure, whatever. These obstacles that get in the way could be at a federal level managed in a way that if you're qualified to do in the state of California, should work in the state of Vermont, right? And so we're looking at those kinds of pieces. In addition to the teacher shortage, in particular, we know that we have a troops to teachers program. However, we oftentimes don't realize that we have military folks that, when it comes to a diverse community of men and women of color in particular that serve in our military, they can go in at a very young age and then retire, at 40, and they still have a lifetime and a wealth of experience and leadership and understanding of schooling, because they're doing all of that within their own right, to be able to come out and impart that on our young folks. We want to, for lack of a better word, repurpose their life, because they come out of doing that kind of a duty, and then being able to give back to their communities in this kind of way. We need to give the credit for that, for them to become teachers very differently than if someone was just coming out of a university. So those are a couple of the ideas that we have been working on during the time here, and continue since then, to see how we can actually put together maybe some additional language in current legislature to make this actually come to fruition.
And I think you spoke to one of the most interesting and exciting and difficult policy challenges that you confront when trying to address teacher shortages, in that you are addressing 50 different states and 50 different licensing regimes, 50 different legal systems with respect to education policy. So it keeps organizations like yours busy. I imagine you have a lot of legislative marches ahead of you to try to communicate this to all of the different policymakers in all of these different states to create some sensible reforms to address the teacher shortage.
Absolutely. And, I mentioned earlier, I've been fortunate to be able to sit on a variety of other organizational committees where we, do band together. And whether somebody else has taken the lead on an initiative, and it's aligned with our vision, mission, and goals and priorities, we are going to piggyback on that because our strength is in numbers. And so being able to, especially with the March event, being able to collaborate with NABSE is a big plus because, again, we're facing the same issues. We're singing the same song, but it may be to either a slower or faster beat for some.
Our guest has been Dr. Maria Armstrong, the Executive Director of the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. And frankly, when you are the head of the superintendents organization, I feel like that should come with like an even more impressive title. Like you might be the super duper intendant, I think is what we have to start calling you. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting alasedu.org and find out about a lot of the really cool initiatives that this organization's been engaged in. Before we let you go, Dr. Armstrong, we got one last question for you that in light of the experience and expertise that you're bringing to bear in these proceedings, I'm excited to hear your answer to this question. If with the snap of your fingers, you could make any change to the education system, what change would it be?
That's a great question. I think if we as a nation gave the emphasis that we do to our economic standing, our governmental, influence, whatever that may be, and when it comes to funding, we are such a small slice of the pie, but we are actually affecting every faction of the, of how we operate as a nation. And so to invest in education rather than trying to just, appease or, saying that we're doing something about education, reform, we need to take a different look and turn it on its head and really think about investing in our youth. Preventative is always the best medicine in any situation. And that's what I would snap my fingers for.
No argument here. Dr. Armstrong, thank you so much for joining us this week. I've really enjoyed this chat.
As I did too. Thank you, Ryan.
And thank you all for checking out Big Ideas in Education. We'll see you next week.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.